position norms and become accessible militaries have made certain opportunities possible and going about their daily activities and institutional norms and perform gender practice and reproducing the male norm institutions are both enabling culture and economy in our world and system and apparently distribute a privilege of great power subordination with a feminist constructive approach and an institutional focus and object constructive that can also be made to change and just themselves of transnational feminism are important when it comes to gender institutional historical legacy of feminism as a social movement that critique resistance can be crucial in triggering process of reform feminist theories and ethical formation of law changing law and standing and construction such as men's properties not come about automatically. Part 2 is the plan. Thus the plan text. Congress should pass HR Bill 1509 to clarify HR 1509 amends the military selective service to explicitly include women. That's Parker 15. It is time for Parliament to register for selective service in Russian schools where the court upheld that because women are excluded from combat by policy exempting women from registration of violation of the Fifth Amendment. The policy no longer exists in the Congress passed legislation amending the Military Selective Service Act to explicitly include women doing so would remove any ambiguity or reduce room for additional interpretations to bill already exists. HR 1509 was introduced by Robert Charles. Ranger charges with the military to gender standards are soldier development and branches of the service are really no changes in requiring women to register for the draft displaces the traditional culture of relegating women as second-class citizens. That's Holstein. 16 to an obligation to be willing to serve a country in time of war requirement for all citizens to support the nation's high in general. Selective service elected from a symbolic requirement bearing women categorically exclude women from some fundamental civic obligations lots of costs business to many of you women's position of life givers and men's as life takers and girls refer to adult women as girls who legitimize their people to more rights. The job is reserved for men because men's contributions matter more. Women's registration was selective service would weaken the military to have national emergency bearing women from the office protected from privileged military as served as a match for men to prove their masculinity bearing women from registering for additional privilege to not participation in civil violation with women's lack of power gender equality is achieved when women and men enjoy the same rights and obligation to register threaten to maturity requiring women to register for selective service based acknowledging their contributions are as accessible to those of men and CX checks any abuse of an ass from your interpret we works without grant me and all might be on the theory of the interpretation is in check to discourage purpose theory which is uniquely bad for debate and and to clarify the selective service is a military system of national service the United States uses as roughly indeed national service system neither compulsory military government service usually military service US Peace Corps American also knows national service US equivalent in selective service and engaging in law politics within specific context is necessary and good both are avoidable attempts to disengage creates a nihilistic government is unable to connect theory to practice as Carl Lekas 14 steel politics from laws fantasies steel politics from several feminists to avoid engaging in the laws is more problem produces these opportunities to represent as such law was pervasive and unavoidable instead process the opposite by matching foreign politics uncovered by law thinkers and treaty to say operative theory legal authorization of the law contradicts their own innovative theory law can be turned against this point of power theory risk innovation collectivity and activist democracy is provided much ruler conception of the relationship between the law politics and opposition feminist engagement should not be merged with theory to engage in the lives feminists should focus on how to do so in the advance typical solution again only example with the specific legal context which provide the opportunity to examine relationship rather than asserting opposition the law will see political action by official policy theories this highlights the need to track law politics and Congress historically situation context feminists risk of constructing idealism robots of the law feminists need to move away from doomsday characters of the law and part 3 is the offense women in the status quo are excluded from draft representation but this is not isolated exclusion from military based upon a genealogy to justify one instance of unequal treatment with another the result is a never-ending chain that must be broken. That's Letsky 3 why women are explicitly excluded from citizen wise African Americans that will review and treated second class citizen status including someone less than full rights and privilege or really excluded from white men's primary reasons to activities voting party or military service and minor versus half-side the court denied women the right to vote as a primary immunity as a citizen voting was privileged for the citizens who already had a roster for school but the court the reason that because women are excluded from combat position women could be excluded from draft position women were excluded from full citizenship because they had always been excluded the court women's primary equal status to maintain the other current inequality was acceptable neither court after question women's underlying exclusion and war. The state and gender are intrinsically related. Women in war serve as women, marking gender lines that fuel militarized masculinity that disconnects the public from the military, which makes engaging in a war more likely. Gender conscious logic comes first. Gender equality is a predictor of war. The lack thereof makes war more likely in the name of protecting women. That's Schoberg. I love the states and war systems are both gender constituted gender differentiated rules are free. 5 by militarization, women's service and feminized other than the need. Understanding gender militarism is important because of its linked to state nationalism, which depends on national sovereignty. The member of the nation of the church and femininity or supporting masculine gender national shape studied. Identities which the woman's service woman. Gender identity based on words gender identity state gender identity gender comes from states identity influences their propensity to make war gender inequality is a predictor of war gender is one key to war justification gender analysis creating conceptualized war gender stereotype that justify war persuade people to fight and those wars they had bad legislation codifies women's secondary status in institutions like the military that historically defining a nation state that's Abrams 10 feminist women's necessity institute to challenge hegemonic as the military could find men's who dominate role the military had to define institution nation state masculinity is defined around the idea of power in the armed forces and the other nation's preeminent civil power the more preeminent civil masculinity military by these roles reinforce the legal size one rules of legal codification will happen the formal exclusion of women the male only draft registration the military has been put up in position of working law reinforce that such a legal status is magnified by the economic and political power benefits of still for military service the rules are reinforced by political and societal warfare so that purchases the legal standards and the impact is a hegemonic state that can totally reproduce structural violence is a natural occurrence that's repo 6 powers power measured by control materials and seriality that has to save the powers bottom approach states challenges the ontology epistemology social structure the states gender women are marginalized from this point structural violence that state structural equality power relations state does not access the career protection of women's bodies simplified 12, the affective triangle becomes auto-affected, about to do people's feelings or responsibility of working to out deflected, action mobilization affected, signals can never find a voice in resistance to significance becomes a story about enemy because this lack of coherence and message marks, a certain social recognized channels of resistance to the purchase box seems worn out, and so it is part of all since it displays the compounding apathy of the strict mass characters we say, discourse and use of political engagement, and throwing away state-based politics dooms your delusions off, that's D&G, and you have to take small supplies to see this subjugation, the artifacts and ways of watching the BWO, either one fails to produce or one produces more or less than nothing if you're talking the words fat, the worst that can happen is if you throw away the strategies and continuous use on a club trial, continuums of intensities segment. Cut the card segment.
Cut the card at segment?
Yes, try continuums of intensity segment.
Okay, gotcha. Read everything else?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Everybody good? Let's start on the Schoberg evidence in the offense section. The tag is that war is inseparable from gender. This seems to indicate that we can't solve within like state-based politics. At which point, how is the F effective?
Sure. So the argument isn't that like states must necessarily go to war. So I don't know why that's necessarily linked to
No,
state.
but it seems to indicate that three things are inherently tied together: the state, conceptions of gender, and war. At which point, when you keep the state intact, how do the other two go?
Yeah, sure. So our Calarcus evidence is really good on this point. It says that the state is not something we can ignore because the state will be functioning regardless of what we choose to do. However, it's a question of how we decide to engage.
Why does that preclude strategic engagement strategies, i.e. repurposing pedagogy and things like that to mobilize against the state?
Right. Well, there's a couple of articulations of this. First is the materiality claim, which is that we have to be able to understand the material position of feminism. But secondly, or feminist-like understandings. And secondly is the role of the ballot articulations, which is that we have to understand our positionality within institutions, i.e. Debate, as well as within the government.
Cool.
We have to understand how we can function within these.
Why does that understanding of positionality necessarily preclude things like affect?
Well, I mean, are you like talking about the underview arguments or?
In the context of the role of the judge, why does positionality necessitate materiality?
Sure. So the argument is that if we ever want to be able to get something out of affect or get something out of like your delusional, we would have to be able to understand how it can affect us in the real world. Otherwise, your pedagogy just becomes meaningless.
Let's talk about the plan. Let's talk about the plan proper. What does the AF do?
Sure. So I mean, I defend like the plan. So
okay.
Congress
so that means that
so
does that mean that you add names to the Selective Service Registry, or actually defend women serving in the military?
No, we just defend like the plan test. So women would be required to register.
Does that mean that they are actually conscripted, or just that their names are added?
We don't defend conscription. You could argue that a drop.
Well, I mean, at the point that it's the Selective Service Registry, does that defend any form of actual service, or just the adding of these names? The plan text.
Right. I mean, registering for the Selective Service, we would define as being a component of national service. It is key to before having a draft. But we don't defend
if the extent of the app is only adding names to the Selective Service Registry, what does it do?
It doesn't add names. People have to like go and register. So
right.
There is an app that is
if all it does is mandate registering for women, what does it do?
Sure, it makes it so that were a draft to occur, then all women would be placed in the same lottery system that's used now.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the Goldstein evidence. Why is the act uniquely going to displace any kind of culture? Like, why does the military spill over and like stop these like cultural conceptions of women as military?
The Goldstein evidence is pretty good on this. So is the Abrams evidence. It says that women's relationship to the state is uniquely codified by one, the combat rule, and two, the draft.
But doesn't the state still exist with the AF?
Sure, it's not a question. We say like things like the state are probably inevitable. It's a question of how we engage with them and a question of how we can transform them. So we say that we are able to transform the state through these policies because women are no longer seen as secondary citizens. Instead, like the app says, they matter.
Okay. Correct. 318. I'll send the doc. Should be one-off case. Everybody get the doc?
Give me a second to...
Sure. All right.
Yeah, sorry.
Anybody not ready?
Yeah, me.
All right. Okay. All right. Everybody good? The 1AC's focus on the distinct categories of man and woman requires a binary understanding of identity that ensures that people are forced into discrete identity or categories. That's uniquely problematic because a static understanding of individuals causes a systematic exclusion of difference and limitation potential that creates their harms. Mons 4. To comprehend the human body, the social world reduces the multiplicity of body parts to discrete categories of meaning. Bodies become ordered according to hierarchical binary presuppositions. Such as man, woman. No real body ever entirely coincides with either category. Man and woman have no reality other than abstraction. Yet when bodies fall outside of these binaries, they are really rarely granted anything. You will be a boy or a girl. You'll be rejected. You will be organized. Languages, institutions, and system of thought all demanded. Bodies fail to bodies secede. A grid of organization limits the connection the body can make and reduces the potential for difference. And this categorization feeds into a state regulation. The state forces to be visible and understands that so it can be regulated. This regulation is ontological, results in a state of total biopolitical war against its own people. Delusion Guattari 1. Political sovereignty has two heads: the despot legislator, the fierce and regulated citizens, disposal of violence such as through war, uses police, has no one's immunity to them, operates by immediate capture, frontal combat, or the state acquires a war machine opposite of sovereignty prior to its law, and the state operates through a violence unseen. Our focus on the specifics of social issues makes us ignorant of the underlying systems of oppression. Delusion Guattari 2. Violence is found everywhere. The violence of the war machine might appear soft from that of the state, but the state apparatus makes mutilation, death come first. It needs them pre-accomplished for people to be born zombie-like. Mutilation is a presupposition of the state. 3 implications. First, turns case. The 1AC leads us further into reliance on violent and private repressive system. Second, creates a ruse of solvency. Affirmative makes it conclude that we solve the problem really, which is reconfigure the oppression inherent to the system. Third, outweighs case. The 1AC legitimizes systems that make it all expendable and further ensures violence against the marginalized or magnify their own harms, creates a root cause. And the alternative is an embrace of the method of becoming, where we abandon the necessity of structure and embrace openness. This openness is a way of creating new relations that transform being, give rise to ways of finding oppression through resistant structure. Deal unlock 10. Becoming our struggles to achieve a life open to new relations, trajectories, become not history, becoming straight to the we're drawn to, escape from power, to express desires that might be world altering, and emphasizing desire, the ever unfinished nature of life lends to becoming, so we prevent the responsibility to think of life in terms of new sections of propellants, but if you use the question relies on receptivity to others, they continue. Desire is constantly opening up territorializations of power. Assemblages are shifting into relations among institutions that constantly construct desire depression, and assemblage always has a line of escape by which it liberates desire, becoming makes space for possibility, what could be as a crucial dimension, and only the alternative breaks down these static categories that repress women. A fluid understanding of being allows us to cast away the categorization that creates problematic and oppressive distinctions between the arbitrary categories of man and woman. Asma 14. Feminist writers recognize new approaches to dislodge movement from its present state. Becoming enables transformation of our lives. Its affirmation of fluid boundaries forces us to avoid repetitions, thus opening spaces where new forms of agency can be engendered. Nomadic theory opens a new space for redefining identity and becoming political subjectivity as sites of resistance. This is an important move for minority vocations in feminism. A feminist practice requires attention to be paid to both identity as set of identifications and to political subjectivity as the quest for sites of resistance. And the judge must be on an insular classroom. The role of the judge is to embrace pedagogy of affect that allows for the analysis of the relations of concepts and questions, foregone conclusions over creating Slack 7. By not engaging in a dualistic struggle that assesses higher pedagogy of affect works to escape territorialization, will be proposed to develop a practice of teaching to engage pedagogy of affect concepts within the classroom as tearing classroom to see interact with anything, and the role of the ballot is to endorse methods of affective analysis. This is key to accessing new ideas that enable to education. It's especially important because fiat's illusory. We can't change the world one debate round, but we can change our own approaches to the world. Smet 6. Students extract forces that vitalize systems by diversifying the system of variations. School environment create conditions to actualize students with potential to open opportunities never to close in the absence of an external and eliminates hierarchical power structure. Then the case proper. Start on the role of the judge and ballot. They say that we need to prioritize good forms of knowledge and forms of knowledge that are within the dominant system, but the dominant system prioritizes forms of knowledge that lead back to the state. That is the only way to break free of these is use affective analysis. That means under their own role of the judge and ballot, my role of the judge and ballot, control the internal link to contesting dominant forms of knowledge, but beyond that, look to the role of the ballot. They say that we need to contest forms of hypermasculinity, but that doesn't happen in a world where categories are reified, only recreates the same kind of gendered violence because we mark people as gendered, understand how to perpetrate violence on them because we locate them at the sites of specific violence means that it's inevitable unless you evaluate the K. Go to the plan. First, on the Parker evidence, all they defend is adding people's names to the list just proves that within the system there are very minute forms of improvements that really do nothing at all because it only leads to the exact same overarching system means that the fact that they defend just adding names means that all there is a drop in the bucket. The state just recreates the same exact system on the Goldstein evidence. They say that they displace a culture of the secondary citizen, but the secondary citizen always exists as long as there is a hierarchy, means that they only recreate it because it's predicated on the existence of hierarchies, which happens with state structures. Then, on the Carlac evidence about state engaging good. First, I repurpose pedagogy. That's key to creating a form of politics that is both affective and practical. It's the way in which we use pedagogy to understand ideas that are not static, only way to create knowledge that isn't insular. We can't understand things except in terms of how they relate to other things, which means that the pedagogical use of debate to create affect is a prior question to engaging in politics because you can do that in other places. Then they work within the dominant legal system. The things that don't change anything, it's the overarching structure. They move too far into this idea of engaging with politics and don't allow for any sites of resistance because they just become complicit within the majority of politics. Go to their offense section on the Lesky evidence. First, recognize that unequal treatment is inevitable in hierarchies, that's D and G, and second, it only gets recreated. Working within the delineated categories where the state solves nothing, drops from the recreated hegemonic masculinity by recreating categories ensuring complicity with minoritarian groups. It's not a question of how large categories can get. It is a question of why categories exist in the first place, or at all three. Construction of masculinity is used in shaping modes to belong to the state. Hegemonic masculinity is preserved by mandatory conscription. Through this limited inclusion, the state ensures the loyalty from non-hegemonic groups while at the same time maintaining their marginalization. As they internalize masculine ideology, become loyal citizens. They set the state's military policies. Militaries have not altered their basic gender structure categories such as citizen and soldier. Simply cannot expand it to include women, and independently turns the app, shows that all their methods of incorporation will lead to a complicity that prevents greater and broader systems of improvement, means that they allow for complicity within the system. Then on their Schoberg evidence, look at the tagline. It says that war, state, and gendered violence are all inseparable. Means that the only way to do this is by deconstructing the state. All the D and G arguments show that violence is always perpetuated if there is a state to codify bodies. All of their arguments about codification just prove that unless we move with that state, learn how to act outside of the state, there's no reason that it doesn't get recreated. Means that the act comes prior, or that all comes prior. Then on the Abrams evidence, they say bad legislation, but that codification comes straight from the way that they understand bodies. Then the hegemonic state argument, it's not unique. There's already a hegemonic state. That's a GNG2 evidence on the underview. They say affective politics bad, but first, the index is in the context of affective apathy. The fact that I repurpose pedagogy for an active notion means that there's no link. Second, the fact that I mobilize pedagogy, use to create notions of becoming woman or ways of understanding the act through a critical lens, means that it's not just a self-affecting pedagogy. The card talks about self-affect, but this is about affect in the context of understanding other ideas. Then they say throw away the alt because D&G say that we need the state, but that's not true. What D&G say is that we need to strategically use structure and expose the way structure works, which means that the fact that I'm working with a debate or still adhering to speech times or methods of utilizing strata while breaking down others, it doesn't mean that the state is good. D&G hate the state. So, negate.
Cool. Could the policy happen in the world of the alt?
Are you asking if it's a floating pick?
Yeah.
It's not.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about your last argument. You said D&G talks about how we have to strategically engage in institutions. Why isn't the affirmative an example of
Okay, it says that we strategically use strata, right? The fact that you cede everything to dominant politics necessarily means that you just engage in the dominant idea of a politics. The way that the alternative the way that the alternative
let's just go to the alt. What does it mean to embrace this alt?
Okay, so becoming just understands things as not static because we don't because things are changing over time.
What is a woman?
What is a woman?
Yeah.
The 1NC makes the argument that woman is only what is codified by the state and by society.
Okay, cool. So, what does it mean for a person to embrace this alternative?
What does it mean okay, so it means first understanding that things are relational and fluid, i.e. you cannot
once we understand
put people within specific categories.
Okay, cool. So we say categories are bad and we understand that categories are bad, then what?
I think that it leads to a broader indict of the way that the state operates, i.e. the state can only operate via aggregate action because it has to understand categories of people, which means that inevitably there are people that exist on the margins of categories. What is the state?
Yeah.
The state is a group or assemblage of structures that operate through things like institutions and operate through things like...
So institutions are bad?
I think the argument that the 1NC makes is that institutions necessarily codify certain bodies, which leads to people being existing on the margin of specific categories, and thus marked for violence.
Okay, cool. So does that mean that institutions, all institutions, are bad?
I say that the 1AC's use of institutions is bad.
Okay, because we use institutions. This seems circular. You say that we use institutions and therefore it's bad because it's a use of institution.
No, I say that the aggregate methods of the 1AC's institutions necessarily marginalize certain bodies.
Where do we aggregate?
I think the fact that you understand people as man and woman necessarily means that you put people into two broad
What
categories.
would an app that doesn't link to this look like?
The 1NC doesn't take a stance. I'm not saying, the question is not whether there's an AF that is, fair or something like that. It's a criticism of the overarching structures of categories.
I'm just confused because what is an app that could do something in the real world? What would it look like so that it does not link?
I think as a prior question to taking action, we have to understand affect at a pedagogical level.
Okay, cool. What does it mean for a woman on welfare to understand affect at a pedagogical level?
Okay, so there are two separate layers here. This is in the context of debate, and it comes as a fact that we can use certain, that is exactly why D&G say that there is a strategic use of strata. Sometimes you conform with structure to use structure, but the fact that we can expose narratives within debate.
Of the alt?
Do I defend materiality in the alt?
Yes.
I defend the alt as is. It is a micro-political action in the debate space.
Okay, just within the debate space.
That is what all the roll the judge, roll the ballot, and the alternative arguments say. I say fiat's illusory.
Okay, that's fair. What does it mean for the judge to move beyond the classroom if there's nothing but this debate?
So it's the idea that we understand and are able to grapple with conceptions of ideas outside the classroom and then interrogate the ways in which they are presented statically, as in, we can only stand ideas.
Thank you. I'll stop. Let me just send out the doc. The order will be overview, case, okay.
Do I need a separate page for the overview?
I mean, I have room on the top of mine, so like you should flow it. It's not that long.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know where it's from. Just one second. Sorry, this file's like being not saving. Let me hard dogs. Okay, sorry about that. It's sent.
Just wait.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a delay, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just hitting refresh.
Sorry about that. Did you get it?
Still waiting. Just got it. I'm good.
All right. All good?
Yep.
First, for the overview, the thesis of the outside institutions like the military, however, like a woman's being less capable of men, draft legislation is a necessary equalizer. The role of possible for the greater best conscious hyperoscopy and norms of the institution education is uniquely key to discuss the way the policy is in charge within hyperoscopy norms and within the context of national service. The military cannot be neutral. The implications that if you are not challenging the way military policy in support of women's oppression, you're condoning it. The biggest mistake the ANC makes is that they ignore that the state is inherently inevitable, which means that when we step outside of it, we will still have to be able to engage with the state, which means that we have to be able to learn about within institutions like debate. Today is a unique instance where we can talk about the ways that we can use the state to transform politics, because when we leave a place like debate space, we will have to attract the state, which means that the state is functionally eligible, especially because especially because he only articulates the alternative as something we do within debate, which means that there's any reason why we have to function in the real world. That's the reason why you should prefer the right to prefer the affirmative. I'll go for some extensions. First is the plan. Congress should pass legislation amending MSS to explicitly include women, women's roles as secondary citizens, codified by draft, combat laws by the within office. The next step, that's Abrams. And Dave Job is unlikely our military forces all fire. That's goal significations that act is largely symbolic. Historically, oppression has been used to justify oppression. The office key to breaking the change, which means the affirmative is uniquely key to solving this because it says that women's oppression has been codified by their unique experience within exclusion within the draft, and that's the landscape. And then they show bring it back. The unequal rules are justified are used as the justification for what the office key to disrupt the militarized masculinity that's historically deployed to protect women. He makes a couple of arguments. First, all of those case arguments are predicated on him winning the critiques. So if I went into essential creates the reason why you could just vote on case, but also there's something. First, he says that his role of the role of the melody is a prerequisite. He ignores the equality acceptance or the Oh yeah, so the only card I wrote was the Alto Duo card.
Okay. Cool. What happened, crap? 318. Start. What were the texts of the permutations?
Perm do both and perm do the all in all their instances.
Okay. So it's just K top down, then the app, and then an overview. Everybody good with that?
Sorry, one second. Okay, you said K app overview?
Yeah. Everybody good?
So flow the overview separately.
No, it's just like, it'll be like reasons how, like, it'll just like be interaction on the big picture, so it shows how round, like how the round breaks down. It's not like overview, like arguments.
Are you reading anything new?
No. Okay. Everybody good? Start on the link level, extend the Melin's evidence specifically that focus on identity categories, just reifies the binary understanding of things. They say that that leads to forcing us to assume like they read the analysis of evidence, but first, no, the argument being made is that identities are contingent. There's no way that we can fit people into two discrete categories. People are too diverse. There are too many moving parts within the machines that are people to force them into two distinct categories. Means that identities make no sense as a method to understand people. Then extend that affect solves. They say that it forces assimilation, but that's not true. It just means that we understand relationality instead of making people can still relate to one another, but they relate to one another based on specific experiences instead of based on labels. Then extend the first piece of D&G evidence says that categorization feeds into an ontological biopolitical war. Turns case always specifically means that there's only going to be a re-articulation of the same problems within the state. And extend the D&G2 evidence says that only leads to an ontological state of violence. Outweighs their arguments because it makes violence inevitable. Turns case they can see that it's the root cause of their arguments, which means that any reason why I win the alternative is a reason that the affirmance goes away. It's the alternative proper. They say permutation do both, but links are disads. They concede the link specifically says that their employment of categories on the macro level, like man and woman, or what create the problems and endorse the state perspective of large scale thought means that you can't do both without a huge disad that just re-engenders the same kind of violence. Cross-apply their arguments about how it makes bodies codified when they use those labels like male and female. It makes it easier for the state to mark bodies as deviant, make those bodies susceptible to violence. Turns case then on the perm double bind arguments. First that just recreates institutional control, shows that the state wants to maintain power over everything. Second, it's specific to the app. It's about the ways in which categories are used. Overwhelms any advantage to the permutation because it just means that categories are re-engendered. Third, there is no other instance. It is a method debate. There is no all other instance to do the permutation, and it's a question of the material of the statist approach of the app versus the affective approach of the critique. Then they say there's no way for people to engage in it. But the argument is that engagement doesn't happen within the debate space. Debate is a pedagogical space, which means we use it to promote different kinds of pedagogy like affect. That's really important when we go to the conceded framing. But first, extend the ASME evidence. Says specifically that alt solves case by breaking down these categories means that without categories, it deconstructs the kinds of violence that are perpetrated against people who are placed in the category of women. Which is key because it's the only way to solve the overarching structures. Go to the framing. Extend the role of the judge. A pedagogy of affect is the constitutive obligation of a pedagogical space. Comes before other arguments about engaging in a public space because it's a pedagogical space which necessarily needs to promote affect because it's the only way to promote a kind of education that is not insular. They concede that means that the only constitutive obligation is to promote an affective analysis, which only the negative does, and extend the role of the ballot, which is about affective analysis. The only way that we can differentiate, create strategies against the state, which is the Semetsky evidence. Then go to the app. They say on the overview that there needs to be institutional change, but first they concede fiat is illusory, means that there is no way that they actually create any form of institutional change, means that the only method is the negative. But second, they concede that pedagogy must be an affective space, means that all of their arguments about needing an institutional political approach don't make sense in the context of debate in particular. Then on the arguments that they make, they say first that the app is symbolic to break the chain, but first fiat is illusory, which means no chain is broken. They do nothing. Then second, they say that the app is still a symbolic alignment with the overarching structures of the state. Turns this argument because it just legitimizes the state and the oppression that it perpetrates. Then they say that action within the state is a prerequisite. But first, even if action within the state is true, we act outside the state. The debate instantiates the space of affect, which means that it doesn't relate to the state. But second, it just recreates conformity within the system. They concede a case turn, which is the Orna evidence that specifically says their kinds of reforms only lead to re-articulation of conformity that ensures gendered violence. Means that even if they win all their arguments, the cold concession of that case turn means that all their case offenses turn because it only reinforces hegemonic masculinity. Means they don't meet their own framing. Then they say they don't defend this. Then they say they don't defend the state, but they defend the structures of the state that leads to a widespread legitimation of the state. Doesn't matter if they don't defend the state proper. Then on the Caraculus evidence about engaging. They answer the I-meet argument by saying pedagogy doesn't lead to anything, but that's not true. They just try to cross by the few, but extend through ink. The specific argument is that when we combine notions of pedagogy within an analysis of politics, it leads to a better liberation strategy. That is the Albert Slack evidence. Turns their arguments means that the pedagogical analysis of the affect that the negative presents is the only way to understand things. Then they say that not everyone can engage in affect, but everyone always engages in affect. These specific ways in which we understand experience as relational and relate to one another through specific lived experiences is a methodology of that intensity of affect means that it's not true, and even if there needs to be material engagement that happens in public spaces, not debate spaces. Then on the Orna evidence proper, they fully concede the Orna evidence, which specifically indicates that the kind of limited inclusion efforts that the app present only leads to a re-articulation of violence and hegemonic masculinity. Means that even if they win defense on the critique, it doesn't matter because they completely concede a case turn. So overview of the round. First, it is a question of categories. Woman doesn't intrinsically mean anything until states and institutions place specific models on them. The only way to break down the violence against specific categories is to break down the mechanisms used to mark people through specific categories. Means that the alternative comes prior to any of the specific arguments, which means prioritize the fundamental questions of the one and see why are women excluded? Why are they given lower wages? Just because they are marked as women, which means that the only way to do this is to challenge structures. The fiat is illusory. The only arguments here are constitutive of pedagogy. They concede that fiat is illusory. It means that it is a question of the best affective analysis, which is only the arguments from the negative. They concede links, which are always dissets of the permutation and dissets of the app. The fact that they concede that it's pedagogy is damning, because the only arguments are in the context of pedagogy for Deleuze, which means that as a prior question to any of their public space engagements, we need to use debate as an affective space because it's pedagogical.
Cool. I had 1 minute. Hold on, sorry, I wrote it down. 1, 2. The order will be app. So overview app and C. Okay. Okay. Is everyone good?
Yeah.
Couple dooming concessions versus he's partially conceded card like evidence, which is we have to be able to understand how to engage with people when we leave debate spaces. It's the only way that our pedagogy becomes meaningful, which means that if we learn nothing about engaging with the real world around is functionally meaningless because the pedagogy of this only in a vacuum that is functionally conceded, which means that there's a strong reason why you should err affirmative on engaging with the state in some instances. He's also conceded that engaging with the state in some instances is uniquely good, i.e. the affirmative doesn't take a stance that we should engage with the state in all instances, only that is sometimes it is necessary to be able to create change with it, which means insofar as he's complete when I see he has conceded that engaging with the state in this instance is unique, not a reason why engaging with the state in all instances, which means that if I want a reason why the affirmative doesn't necessarily link, that's going to be a reason why you can justify the perm double bind. She's also, he has conceded that categories exist regardless of the affirmative, which means that he's conceded a no link argument, which is also another reason why you can't in goodwill vote on the critique. But let's go on to case. First, extend the role of judge, which says to be an advocate for down before the knowledge, extend the role of battle, which is whoever best challenges hypermasculine within institutions. He's dropped some very important arguments, which is that we have to challenge hypermasculinity within debate uniquely because of the way that spills over to other institutions. I.e., we see a debate in a microcosm of the real world, which means that when we challenge these norms within debate, we are able to challenge them in the real world, which is the reason why the affirmative deal with that actually leads to pedagogical spillover. That's probably an indictment to his political arguments. Also, the reason why the affirmative uniquely sells means that there is going to be a net benefit to the performance players, and why the affirmative connects all the permutations of all the neg impacts. First, he goes for this fiat solutionary argument. I'll concede the fiat solution. It's not a matter if we actually pass the panel, it's how we engage with state within debate, which is that if there's a reason why engagement with state within debate is uniquely good, i.e. the idea of discussing these things uniquely, that's the reason why I should err. Affirmative, he says like his arguments are that we or I'll answer his link arguments in a minute. The only alternative that he says I concede is that we just is that we incorporate identities, which leads to endless categories which then gender bias. But we said that but we said that the affirmative is uniquely can erupt in these categories because categories exist outside of us, which means we have to understand how they work within debate spaces, which is the reason why the affirmative is uniquely breaking those down. Let's go on to the critique. First, he is vastly miscalculated link analysis. brisk about. Good debate. Is it cool if I step out?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Someone like to do the announcement? All right. Congratulations to both debaters for making it to this double octafinals of the Heart of Texas Invitational. It's a 3-0 decision for the negative. Sure, I guess I can start. I like voted neg on this case turn. I think I think it was kind of conceded. It seems pretty strong to me. I don't think it's predicated off of winning the K. I think it answers a lot of your stuff about like engaging with the state in some instances is good, because even if it is sometimes good, this is not a particularly good instance of it. I think the 2-hour explanation for it isn't great, but I think it does get to the sort of points of the argument that I need to make it. And like upon rereading this evidence, it seems pretty great. Like the last line, which is just like categories such as citizen and soldier cannot simply be expanded to include the women, and like some other arguments in here about how like they internalize masculine ideology and they become sort of part of the sort of hypermasculinity of the military, and that sort of just inclusion of women into the military doesn't solve any of this hypermasculinity stuff that you talk about, and some other stuff about how like it's just like it even has like this term mandatory conscription like being a specific link to the AF. So in terms of F quality, I think it's about as good as it can get. I don't know, the link debate on the critique was a little bit annoying because you need to be much more specific in establishing a link. Because like when the 2AR and the 1AR are both like, we didn't really establish a particularly strong identity category. I'm thinking, are you serious? Like you defend a bill, which is like very clearly going to use technical language the state has specifically used to define gender categories. I mean, like think about it in like the age of Trump, it's like very unlikely you're going to find a bill that is going to get passed that's like not going to redefine these sort of identity categories that you're talking about. It's not that hard to just be like the state.
So the link word
really does it.
So the link word just need to be more explicit.
Yeah, because your link is entirely theoretical. It's just like if the affirmative focused on identity categories, that would be bad because you can't fit people into categories. And but like you don't have a specific one to the app, other than like the state necessarily creates identity categories. But I think you need to be a lot more specific. There's like, and I think you also need to be like a little bit more explicit in like how does this sort of like how do these identity categories manifest, and like what is the sort of impact to that in sort of like an easy to grasp sense. So like a good example in the context of this app would just be like, you know, what is a woman, and like what happens to all those people that like sort of fall outside that binary category, and how does the state treat them? And it's not that hard to point to empirical examples in like right now of how that sort of gender binary or like identity statusization like manifests itself in material violence against people. I think that's not that hard to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the case turn is like probably what I like sit hardest on, but I think that I'm willing to grant that yeah, I think the links are probably true, but without the case turn I would be hesitant because I think that I hesitate to think that the links are true just from your explanation versus like my understanding of the argument prior. And so I think that needed to be clearer. But I also think there's like an extended impact out of the K. I don't ever like get a super clear response to this like ontological violence impact that was extended in the 2N. And I think that you're like somewhat ahead on the roll of the ballot, even though that's like slightly messier. But yeah, the case turn is what I ultimately vote on.
Yeah, I agree. I don't want to hammer the case turn enough. I just think that you get a little bit too caught up in the extensions that you have pre-written for the case, and that the case was conceded. But in this round, unlike last round, there was the evidence that you read is kind of specific to what the movement of the AC is trying to do, and how that gets co-opted as well. I think that the movements that you're making in the 2AR, just to talk about something different on the alternative, are a little bit better than they were in the 1AR. I think in the 1AR you let him get away with a little bit too much on the line by line and delineating between what this space is supposed to be used for and what it's not supposed to be used for. And you want it to be kind of like a testing ground, right, for us to be able to engage in that politics that goes into the public space, whereas he wants it to be kind of a rethinking ground where we like open up possibilities. And I don't know why it has to be what he says it is versus what you say it is, but I'm not getting a lot of challenges to that until the articulations in the 2AR. So I think if those come a little bit earlier too, then that could further problematize wanting to evaluate the role of the ballot or the role of the judge coming off of the K. And it can at least allow you to operate kind of at the same level as to what we ought to be doing with this debate space, right? Do we only go as far as the K goes, the alternative, or do we also then, see this as a fertile testing ground to like look at, the fact that we're going to be engaged in politics, pretty soon, right, outside of the debate space?
Yeah, I think the big thing I would change about the 1AR is I think if it was just like slightly more, I almost feel like it needed to be just a little more organized and concise, because I think you would have had better time allocation, and then like I think some of these arguments would have been really articulated.
Thanks for editing.
Thank you so much.